Hey guys, welcome to Liberty Speaks with Dr. Mav. I'm Dr. Mavrakakis. Liberty Speaks is the podcast for Liberty Speaks Inc. The point of Liberty Speaks and its podcast is to discuss libertarian, liberty, constitutional, and peace concepts outside of the Libertarian Party. And we bring awesome guests to talk about various types of liberty and peace concepts. I am super excited to bring on Spike Cohen. Spike Cohen was the 2020 Libertarian vice presidential candidate. He is the founder and president of You Are the Power, which is an amazing organization that really does demonstrate that you really are the power. And he's a successful businessman. He's been on TV shows, multiple podcasts, on with Kennedy. He's an amazing guy, and I'm super grateful to have him on. Welcome, Spike Cohen. How are you?
I'm doing great, Irene. Thanks for having me on.
So, Spike, a lot of things are going on in this world, and I just wanted to highlight the things that you do at You Are the Power, and maybe tell us a little bit about where the idea came from, and maybe some interesting cases that you've had. I know a lot about them, but I'm sure the audience doesn't.
We've had a lot of cases. And for those who don't know the background of You Are the Power, when I was running for president or vice president in 2020, I came across two disparate groups of people that were very frustrated. One of them was libertarian activists who were very excited to be involved with the campaign and setting up events and helping raise funds and doing, door knocking and flag sign waving and all that stuff. And but they weren't really sure what to do outside of maybe every other year doing elections or every 4 years doing the big ticket elections and stuff, what to do the rest of the time. And some of them had tried just going to events and setting up a booth for their state affiliate or their local affiliate or their campaign, and they're like, yeah, we've done that before, what else can we be doing? Another group of people that were coming to my events were people that had things that were happening to them or their loved ones in their city, their county, their state, whatever, and they didn't know who could help them. And so they'd show up to my event and tell me about something their mayor or their city council or the state agency was doing to them or something. A lot of it having to do with COVID restrictions and stuff during that time, and but other stuff as well. And at the time I would say, well, here, let me try to connect you with the local, libertarians here. And if there's something we can put together, I can share it on my social media. And what we found after the campaign ended was that some of the most interest we got in our social media content had nothing to do with our campaign and was about those causes. And many of those activists who had gotten involved with helping those folks said, this was great. Is there anyone else we can help? And I thought we might have something here. And so as a proof of concept, we started it in 2021. I wanted to take on some test causes that we would pick to see before I create nonprofits and start asking for donations and everything. Let's see, is there some actual legs to this? And there was. We had some incredible results in 21. And so in 22, we officially launched. And that's what we do. We find people who are being disrespected and abused by out of control local and state government officials. And we organize and rally the public to apply public pressure on those officials that are doing that harm until they back off. And as simple as that sounds, it has been absolutely incredible. We've had something like a 90% success rate, actually upwards of over a 90% success rate now on our causes. We are growing by the day, and it's been absolutely incredible. Now, when we first started, the first few causes that we took on were the kind of things that might first pop into your head when you think about fighting local government corruption. Things like eminent domain abuse, where local city council was, abusing eminent domain to take someone's property to benefit them, or zoning abuse. They would cook up some perceived or contrived zoning violation to justify taking their property. Police brutality stuff, refusing to release body cam footage. And we still do stuff like that. But then last year, we came across, actually, it had happened before that too, but it was an isolated incident. But then last year, we had a second case of a family who had a child with a chronic health condition. And for some reason, the state was insisting on calling it abuse, not only ignoring the medical evidence, but actually fighting to keep the parents from even having the medical evidence, and then fighting it in court to not be allowed to be admitted so that they could take their children permanently from them and potentially put them in jail and not allow them to ever see each other again, that legally estrange them for the rest of their lives. We thought, and we vetted it. You know, I didn't want to take on a cause where there might actually be abuse. So we thoroughly vetted it like we do with all our causes. And turned out, yeah, the state was doing that. So we put that cause out. And for some reason, the first time when we put out a similar cause for a family in Texas, we put the cause out. We got that we helped get their child back. And then we went back to doing other stuff. With this one, when we put it out, all of a sudden, out of the woodwork came dozens of other families in that state and around the country saying pretty much the same thing. And we've vetted their causes, and pretty much all of them we went through, and yep, turned out that it was one after another. They had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, they had neonatal rickets, they had something, some kind of medical condition that happened as a result of complications during pregnancy or during delivery. They had something that was causing them to have either fractures or bruising or some other thing that at first glance maybe you could say there might be evidence of abuse, but after even just a couple of blood tests and some additional x-rays, it's very obvious that it wasn't abuse. And yet the state insisted, not just one state, but multiple state child protective service agencies not only called it abuse, but the family courts would often defer and say it was abuse. And it seemed like all the way down the entire pipeline, from the so-called child abuse pediatrician all the way through to the family court judge and everyone in between, the social workers, the police, and everything else, it almost felt like it was a conspiracy that was happening over and over again on almost the exact same track. And what we found is it looks like it may actually be a conspiracy. Under Title or Section 4D, maybe it's Title 4D of the Social Security Act, the Social Security pays funds out to state child protective services and everyone else down that pipeline for each case they take on, but only if they call it abuse. And so they're actually subsidizing not the work they're doing, but a specific outcome. And if it turns out not to be abuse, they don't have to give the money back. But if they don't say it's abuse, they don't get any money. And now many of the states have harmonized their funding in the same way that you also have to call it abuse to get funding from them, or you get a bonus if you additional funding if you call it abuse. And so now there's all this pressure on everyone down that pipeline to say, yeah, it's abuse, and just push it down to the next person and hope they actually do their job. And of course, no one does. And so we have seen that over and over and over again. Turns out, and we saw this during COVID, we've seen it many times. When government says at any level, when they say, we're going to give you money, but only if you call it X, you're going to get a lot more of X, even if it's not really that. And that's what we're seeing. Now, the good news is for that family, the Hernandez family, their children are back home. They are in the process of rebuilding their lives. They're allowed to live back together, and we are still fighting to get the criminal charges dropped, which we're very confident will happen because they have absolutely no evidence of it. Actually, they do have tremendous evidence of them having done nothing wrong and the state having done everything wrong. And in just the past couple of weeks, we've gotten 2 more families reunited as well, the Collins family and the Savely family. And it's just, it's one thing to help someone get their, keep their home from being taken from them. That's a very, very important thing. We all need a home, right? It's another thing to have when someone has been wrongfully arrested or brutalized by police, to have the body cam footage to prove that they didn't do anything wrong. That's very, very important. Or to stop a charity from getting arrested for feeding people that are in need. Those are all incredible things. It's a completely different thing when you meet someone whose child was being stolen, trafficked from them by the state. They were powerless to stop it, and we were able to help them get their kids back. It's just a completely different level.
Yeah, it's such important work, and this idea of medical kidnapping is such a problem. And there's a lot of libertarian concepts intertwined in the work that you're doing. And absolutely. And it's just great that you're doing this work. And the story, I cry every time I read a story for a while because I'm such an empath. But I'm so glad that you've reunited these families. And I want to belabor one of the points. There's a corollary in modern medicine in other aspects. You know, you made the point that, you know, when government kind of has a mandate tied to money, it inadvertently creates these mandates that lead to harm. And one of the examples that is part of the COVID mania tyranny debacle as well is something called meaningful use and quality measurement payments. In healthcare, doctors are paid a certain amount of money per patient, but they also get bonus payments, both physicians and hospitals. And bonus payments are tied to these quality measurement payments. And it's like, you know, for Blue Cross, 95% of the 100 kids vaccinated get $40,000 per 100 kids or something like that. You know, that's not exactly it.
Yeah.
And it's also tied to different things, but it's also tied to hemoglobin A1C related to diabetes and cholesterol and all these things. And what happens is it pushes physicians towards vaccines and medications as opposed to counseling on lifestyle because of the way the quality measurements are done. And also you have to do a certain amount of quality measurement payments, both hospitals and physicians. And if you miss your measures, they can decrease your reimbursement for something like 2 years. It's not the exact what I'm saying, by 20% for every patient that you see. Not that patient. And so it really inadvertently has skewed modern medicine in this direction as it specifically relates to this medical kidnapping. And in many cases in COVID mania tyranny and the debacle that is giving kids who cannot consent puberty blockers, which we don't have to get into, but it's the point. Physicians, my physician colleagues are failing to provide informed consent. And they're also failing to run the differential diagnosis. And there's a lot of laziness, both in psychiatry and in all of the subspecialties related to running the differential diagnosis and looking for what we call an organic cause of the medical condition. So my colleagues, again, should be incredibly criticized for this because it's the physicians are key to failing to follow the Hippocratic Oath. That is a key, and I do criticize them, and that's a big part of this medical kidnapping, in addition to money incentives related to items of this sort and related to quality measurements. So it really points out a lot of important concepts about getting the government out of healthcare and complete deregulation, increase competitive forces, and really change everything in modern medicine, because this wouldn't happen if we had a properly functioning non-captured medical system.
There'd be significantly less of it at the very least. I'm not sure there's any utopian system, but there's certainly we now have subsidization of pressuring people, especially when it comes to kids, to do a specific thing that's tied to a ton of funding. And then if they don't, then there's this increasing risk and in some cases likelihood or certainty that their children will be taken from it if they don't do it. So we're told, well, the parent ultimately has the choice. Yeah. They have the choice of either doing this thing, essentially whether they want to or not, or losing their children. And in fact, one of our causes, and it was actually something that I don't even know if they were getting, maybe there was some kind of kickback involved, but a mother brought her newborn or very young, either days or weeks or months old child, very, very young child, to the hospital. He was sick. And the doctor said he had a minor, I think, respiratory infection, but I may be wrong. It was a minor infection of some kind. And so he said, I'm going to give the child Bactrim. And so she looked, I think it was Bactrim. But anyway, whichever antibiotic he had prescribed had a black box warning The mother actually, you know, she loves her child, so she did some research herself before agreeing to it. And it turned whether or not it was Bactrim, whatever antibiotic he had prescribed had a black box warning. You know what that is. For those who don't, a black box warning is the highest level of warning that a drug can have. And it basically says there are significant risks of death. You need to know them before taking this drug. Here they are. Like, you're required to be told at least once or twice before even agreeing to take this drug what your possible risks of death are with this. And I don't believe those were even disclosed to her. And so she said to the doctor, I think I'm going to get a second opinion. So she went and got a second opinion, went to another doctor who said, yeah, no, we're not giving it. I think it was Bactrim, but whatever it was, we're not giving this child that antibiotic. And so they went with out of curiosity, I now want to look up what it was. Anyway, so they said, yeah, we're going to prescribe this other much more mild antibiotic. And so they did. And the child was fine. And then the state took the child, put her clindamycin. They prescribed him clindamycin. And they were like, and so when she looked it up, it turned out that was very scary. The other doctors prescribed him something much more mild. He was fine. They took the child from them, from her, took the baby, put him on clindamycin, and he started having seizures, and he started getting really, really sick, unbeknownst to his mother, who had no idea any of this was happening because they left her completely in the dark. She found out afterwards. Once they stopped giving him the clindamycin, he started getting okay again. But they tried to use what was happening to him as evidence that he had been abused by her, that this was a holdover from what she had done. And we had to fight hard for that. And in court, they tried to say that she hadn't gotten a second opinion, even though she literally did. And the doctor came to the court to say, yes, this is what happened. And it was an absolute nightmare. And it came down entirely to a parent, a mother, being given an opinion from one doctor and then committing the crime of going to another doctor and going with that doctor's opinion. Now, if you take that down its logical conclusion, if that kind of thing is allowed to stand, then eventually they'll do that for you as an adult. You'll go to your first doctor and they'll go, we are recommending to you something that just happens to be the most expensive and the most number of people making money off of this, possible. That's what we are prescribing to you. And if you say, I think maybe not, and I'm going to go to someone else, you could be rounded, you could be arrested. Now, that's not happening often now, as far as I know, for adults, but it's bound to happen. If it's allowed to happen for children, it's going to happen to you. And it shouldn't happen to children either. You as the parent, unless there's overwhelming evidence that you are committing some kind of abuse or some kind of neglect, there should be a significant amount of deference to you as the parent as to whether or not to go along to a procedure. And to your other point, there absolutely needs to be informed consent. In the case of this mother, I don't believe she was told that there was a black box warning, which I believe is actually required by law to tell her. I for many years took an MS treatment that had a black box warning, and literally every single time they'd call me just to check in, they'd have to tell me this whole spiel about it can cause this, it can cause that. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And they're like, yes, but we have to tell you. I don't believe that they ever did that with her. So, but this is what happens when essentially unlimited funding that's printed off a money printer is handed off, but only with a specific outcome. It's I think it was Milton Friedman that said, if you subsidize apples, you get more apples, right? The government is subsidizing specific medical treatments, medical recommendations, and in the case of many of the causes that we take on, specific diagnosed outcomes for children. Specifically, they have to say that they were abused. And so you're going to end up with a lot more over-medicalization, overuse of medicine, and underutilization of things like counseling and preventative care to make sure someone doesn't actually get sick in the first place, and a lot more false allegations of abuse. And that's what's happening.
No, exactly. And it is a good example of the failings of government overreach and central planning, and also that a lot of these things come from, not necessarily in these cases, from the capture of the health sector and the public health sector in general. For example, you know, antidepressants have black box warnings, most of them, for suicidal and homicidal ideation, that they're used to treat suicidal and homicidal ideation, right?
Yep.
So are we really talking to the parents about informed consent? And informed consent necessitates all the risks and benefits discussed with the free ability to decline. And that ability to decline cannot be tied to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, because we have God-given natural law of rights and because our Constitution freaking says so.
Well, and also because that's not consent.
Exactly.
If you're not consenting is tied to punishment, that's not what consent is.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, what a blessing you are to do these cases. But I think people need to understand that what you're doing and talking about is a big representation of the broader picture of lack of freedom in healthcare and in general in this failing constitutional republic. So we really want to make sure to give people the power, which is what you're giving, because your cases are so much winning. I'm laughing because Chris put "you are the power" when I said "you are the power," and it's so cute. He put it on the banner. So
yeah, we're doing a lot of medical freedom stuff, and it's a lot of parenting freedom stuff. We just had a cause come in a couple days ago. I have to actually look it up. It's so new. Brittany Patterson, who lives in Georgia, she has been arrested and charged with reckless conduct because while she drove her older son to an appointment, her younger son, who's 11 years old, walked a few hundred, less than a mile away, walked into town and back. Never like walked on a highway or anything like that. Actually walked down a dirt trail most of the way. At some point, a lady that the son walked by, 11 years old, he's not 5, he's 11. A lady that he walked by asked if he was okay, and he said, "Yeah, I'm okay, thank you." She still called 911, and they made a case out of it. And they said that she was neglecting her child because he walked down to town and back. Then they come to her home and present her with a I think it's called a safety plan. Yeah, a safety plan that involved, she had to designate an adult to be with her children at all times whenever she's not physically in front of them. She had to mandate that there was an app on their phones so that they could be tracked, by her, and I also believe by the state. And there were other things as well that she had to agree to because her child walked about a half mile away. Now, there's my millennial and Gen Z friends right now might feel a little like, well, I don't, I mean, the kid walked away from home. Irene, you and I grew up. I certainly grew up, and I imagine you did too, since we were born before the 90s. Kids walking places was not uncommon. I spent most of my childhood. My parents often didn't know where I was. If I wasn't at school or at home or at like a friend's house, and even if I was at a friend's house, we might walk somewhere, walk to town, or take our bikes. We used to take our bikes a couple miles away to the beach and swim in the ocean by ourselves. And I think maybe our parents might have known that was happening, but they weren't specifically know. So the idea that anything happened as a result of this, much less a safety plan that involved a tracking monitor, is absolutely insane. But it goes back to parental freedom. The kid was fine. She did nothing wrong. And they're now, charging her with reckless conduct for this. And again, if you
I'm sorry.
If you allow that, and this is the newest cause that we're taking, and I believe we'll win on this.
It's great.
But it's insane that this is what we're doing. And again, it starts with that. Inevitably, it's going to become you. It starts with your kids, because we got to protect the children. Like every new infringement on your life and your liberty and your property and respecting you as an individual human being, it almost always starts with your kids, because we got to protect the children. Won't someone please think of the kids? And then it just turns out it works well for you too. And now you are being told where to go. And if that might have sounded insane up until February of 2020, we had a period of time where not only did the government feel like they could tell you where you could go for your safety, but a significant percentage of your neighbors and family and friends and loved ones immediately said, okay, yes, that's what we need for our safety. This is a problem. So, we're not just fighting for Brittany and for her family and for all of these individual families. We are fighting to bring awareness to the specific fact that government involvement in these different things creates these ridiculous outcomes and this insane harm and destruction of people's lives. But on a greater level, this is what government being involved in any aspect of your life will often bring, especially if there's, unlimited funding for it, little to no checks or balances or controls on it. And this sort of, this attitude of, well, if they did it, then it must be for our safety. We like to blame politicians a lot for doing what we kind of, or not we, but many of our fellow voters want them to do. If a politician keeps hearing from their constituents, I want to be left alone, leave me alone, go in there and do the absolute minimum, make sure the bills get paid or whatever, but leave me alone, they'll pretend, even if they don't want to leave you alone, they'll pretend to leave you alone if for no other reason than to get your vote. The reason you've got people like Bernie Sanders and local politicians acting exactly like Bernie Sanders as well is because a good number of voters, when they hear government or government agency or whatever else, they think, oh, good, someone to protect me and to tell others to do things that I don't think they should be doing for their protection and for mine. And the thing is, you're going to get a lot of that if you want that from them. So we're trying to drive home without getting into the politics message of, this ideology or this party or whatever else. On a case-by-case basis, we are consistently showing examples of this is what government involvement in lives looks like. It looks like rampant, out of control, in-your-face abuse with little to no accountability. And the only way that we can put pressure on them on this case and on this case, and we can play, corrupt government whack-a-mole till the cows come home. I'm happy to do so. It certainly helps those families that we're helping. But this is going to be an endless game of whack-a-mole if we don't address the basic the root cause of it, which is the government's propensity to creep further and further into our lives, and a good number of our propensity to want that. The first step is for us to stop wanting that and instead wanting to be respected and treated as individual human beings, and to consistently apply pressure on public officials to respect us as individual human beings and not to impose themselves on us. When we do that, we get a lot less of these causes, and eventually You Are the Power won't have to exist. But in the meantime, we will, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. If you go to youarethepower.net, you can join us today. We'd love to have you be a part of it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And those are incredibly good points that you made. And that is the point of the cases that you take on, because it demonstrates a lot of these important principles. And what you were saying earlier, the reason why I was laughing about how I grew up, I grew up in New York City. I was born in 1967 and I grew up in New York City.
Just wandering around the whole city. Yeah.
But I literally there was no phone. I was supposed to come home when the light went on, but I often didn't do that. Sometimes I didn't. And I mean, I was walking to the corner store when I was 9 years old across the street by myself to buy my dad cigarettes. I was 9 at the time, and I turned out okay. I'm just a physician.
But by the time you were 11, you were probably taking the Staten Island ferry there and back. I was
all over the place. Yeah. But so I was just laughing because I was remembering me, little 9-year-old. I was so happy because I had to cross a big street to get to the corner store to buy the poison cigarettes. But anyway, that's not the point. But the other point that you made, which broke my heart during COVID mania tyranny, and we met during that, and we can tell that story if we want, is that we the people forgot who we are, and we forgot that we have God-given natural law rights to be free individuals and that our Constitution enshrines those concepts. But we also forgot what the point of government is. The only point of government, which you were explaining, is to protect life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. And so it became the destroyer of all those things that it is supposed to be protecting. And people forgot what it's like to be an American. So I'm like, can we just make America America again? Because I just really don't think that we can let this happen again. And there's some signs that we're at least pushing towards the freedom aspect of things. But the other thing people need to realize is the prosecution of this woman is your tax dollars at work. So the stuff that comes out of your payroll that you, because you can't afford groceries, is going to prosecute this woman because her kid was walking down the street. It's just a shame. And this is, you have to stand up for every right, because that's how they slowly get peeled away. Yep. Kind of like the boiling frog, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it is the boiling frog effect. They're not going to, and there's an additional thing. It's the boiling frog effect, but every time they turn up the temperature a little bit, they scare the frog first and go, oh, it's getting really cold out here. We need to turn up the temperature, and go, oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's good. That's how did they get tens of millions of Americans within a matter of weeks, days, to go from, the baseline of, no, I don't think the government should tell me whether or not I'm allowed to go to the grocery store, to saying, if you see your family and they don't live in your house, I want you arrested. I'm going to actively snitch on my neighbors. What did that take? Fear of dying, fear of an unknown novel virus, of their closest loved ones dying. At first it was fear of, we could all die. We didn't know how deadly it was. And then it became, well, your immunocompromised loved ones and your elderly loved ones, and your loved ones with many illnesses, they could die. Your children could die, even though it was obvious it didn't, barely even children didn't even get sniffles from it. But they used that. And you can make people deranged, and you can make them dehumanize others. You can make them look at people not as an individual human being to be respected, but as a threat. They were able to successfully, fast forward past the lockdowns, and now the vaccines are in place, and they're going, oh no, we're not going to mandate it, but if you don't take it, you're a plague rat, and you're responsible for the continuation of this pandemic, and you're the reason everyone's dying, and their loved ones are dying. And actually, you know what? Yeah, we are going to mandate it. By the time they got around to mandating it, there was a significant percentage of Americans who wanted you to. They were successfully able to get the average, I guess, pro COVID tyranny person to hate and fear the unvaccinated more than the virus itself. It's like at some point they actually forgot about why they were supposed to be scared and angry in the first place, and the powers that be had successfully gotten them to now just hate the person, not just fear the virus. Was still a fear, but now their real white hot fear and hatred was on you and on me, because we didn't get vaccinated. We didn't get the jab. And so now we are a greater threat. And I remember seeing the social media posts, the greater threat to the virus is the people that aren't doing this. Why? If the whole idea is the virus itself, why don't you focus on the virus and how to treat it when people get it, and taking your safe and effective vaccine that is safe and effective for you, and leaving me the hell alone because I've decided what's safe and effective for me. And we're well over a year into this pandemic at this point. It's not a pandemic anymore. This is clearly something that's going to be endemic. And so far I've managed well. Why don't you just leave that to me? It's because they were deranged by fear. Same thing about after 9/11. Same thing about it after any kind of major crisis or catastrophe. That's the time, whether government has created it or allowed it to happen or made it worse, they utilize that crisis and the fear and uncertainty that people are under to push the kind of draconian further encroachments into their lives that literally hours or days ago they would have never been okay with. And it's why it's important to keep pushing back on this. It's why it's important to look at the people who were in favor of the lockdowns and now are against them and ask them, that's great that you're now against them. Why are you against them? Are you against them because it turned out they didn't work? Or are you against them because you realize that government shouldn't be infringing on people's lives, even if what they're proposing might work? Because if it's the former, you're going to fall for the next thing. If it's you're retroactively against the lockdowns that happened because it turned out they didn't work, then you're likely going to get duped when it's time for climate change restrictions and, climate change lockdowns or, down days or something like that. You're much more likely to take that on because you haven't realized yet that government is not a good way to deal with problems. And very often government is going to make the problems worse because they have an actual incentive. They have a perverse incentive for there to be more suffering because they're able to get more power and money and control when there's more suffering. So they're actually the last people that you would want to try to reduce suffering during a major crisis because they're literally the only people that benefit greatly when there's more suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And we just simply need to have separation of science and state, just like we have the separation of church and state.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
As a physician who was vaccine injured in 2012, I did not receive the COVID vaccine or biologic. I was medically exempt. I would have never gotten it anyway. I had already seen the problems in the preclinical trials. The other thing, just because we're talking about it, as a matter of record, respiratory virus vaccinations never prevent transmission. And there were serious issues with safety and efficacy before this was launched upon the general population, which means that every healthcare worker and doctor that gave you the COVID vaccine and biologic and didn't tell you that you could have heart attack, stroke, Guillain-Barré, myocarditis, anaphylaxis, and clotting, failed to provide informed consent, violated their code of ethics, and violated the standard of care. That is a matter of fact. And the lawyers are going after everybody, and I'll help anyone I can. Because the doctors, again, fail to follow their code of ethics. If a lot of physicians, there's issues with, we were all censored on social media and people who were trying to speak out like me and much more famous people. So there was a violation of the First Amendment. But no matter, if every doctor looked at the preclinical trials and then provided informed consent and spoke the truth, because a lot of them were suspicious, none of this would have happened. So it's a huge problem with modern medicine, and it has got to stop, and has to do with how captured we are. And it's disgusting and shameful. And I hope we get our act together, and I'm going to do everything I can to fix it. And the whole thing was not scientific. Okay. And we've discussed this. We met with me holding hostage.
I was going to say, this is some of the first stuff that I remember. My name is Irene. You need to know that there's never been a vaccine that's been able to stop a respiratory virus. And also, here's my white paper that I have that shows that, military members that military personnel who got the flu shot were more likely to get COVID and have more severe cases of COVID. Great to meet you. That was like our first conversation. Yeah.
You know when that was? So listen, guys, this is so funny. So I volunteered to be a driver for Spike in the fall of 2020 when he came to visit Delaware. And I brought this article that I still talk about. It's called Flu Vaccine Increases Coronavirus Susceptibility by 36%, because in the beginning of the pandemic, the people that were testing positive for COVID were military, nursing home, and healthcare workers who all heavily flu vaccinated. So people need to really think about that, and that people are inadvertently, here's my white paper about people are becoming allergic to it. So
I remember them saying, to help protect yourself, just go ahead and get the flu shot. And I remembered thinking at the time, I didn't know anything you had told me about it could potentially make them even more susceptible. I thought, the hell does the flu shot have to do with COVID? They had literally just spent all this time chastising anyone who compared COVID to the flu. How dare you even begin? The COVID's so much more serious than the flu. You're spreading dangerous misinformation. Also, get the flu shot because, just in case. And it was like, what did that have to do with it? And
Nothing.
I remember thinking, even before I got the thing from you, I remember thinking, I'm like, this is just to make money for the pharmaceutical company. It has nothing to do. If it is true, which, again, I'm not a doctor, but if it's true that you know, flu A and flu B have absolutely nothing to do with a coronavirus, and so taking something for this won't do anything for this, and vice versa, then what the hell are you? Why is that even coming up? Why it would be like saying, yeah, oh, well, you know, be sure to get your tetanus shot or something. Like, it has nothing to do with that. And then when you showed me that, and I remember because my friend and assistant LaQuinn was there with us,
Yes.
and I'm reading all this stuff, and then you dropped it. You took us to get the car, and I believe I drove the first bit at some point during, because we then had a 2-hour drive to meet up with the van, with the bus. And at some point I was driving and he's reading it and he's like, and he was a reserve in the Air Force Reserves. And he's like, no one told me this. I'm like, no one told you. And he's like, shouldn't someone have told me? He's like, first he said, do you think any of this is true? And I'm like, why would she has no reason to give me this? Like, there's no reason for her to lie about this. So yeah, I mean, I'll look more into it, but I can assume this lady has no reason to lie to us. She has no interest, no vested interest here. And he went, yeah, no one told me any of this. I'm like, yeah, probably not. And I mean, we see that like military service members have significantly higher rates of all sorts of chronic illnesses. And there's probably multiple factors involved: the burn pits that they're near, the stress that they're under, the, you know, physical trauma and stuff like that. They also like have to get every shot under the sun and then some, including ones that most of us never have to get because we don't go to parts of the world that mandate additional like malaria shots and stuff like that. Maybe there's something there. Oh, and they're not being told if there is.
That's a whole other thing. But do you remember? I went to get your Red Lobster, but this is September of 2020, and I wouldn't give him his Red Lobster unless he took the article. I still talk about it in my white paper. We're trying to get it published.
It was on top of my
September of 2020.
I have this thing for you to read, and it was on top of like my little like to go thing of salmon or whatever that is, shrimp or whatever you got me. And you're like, this is just some reading while you eat. And it was like a, you know, multiple pages with like, and it was not light reading. It wasn't like a narrative. It was like a clinic. It was like a trial data, or not trial, like medical study, with like charts and graphs. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, you actually, I mean, this was serendipitous that you gave it to me, because I have MS, as you know. And so I've read a lot of charts and graphs and studies about different, you know, new and novel treatments and ideas for MS and, you know, all sorts of stuff. So I've gotten used to reading that and what they mean and everything else. And you would highlight, to your credit, you would highlighted the different stuff. But I'm like, this is not, I know some people you would have given that to, and they would have gone, yeah, I don't know what that means. And you know, they would have just said, I'm sure this is very serious. And then that would have gone as far as that. But yeah, that was, I will say, it didn't surprise me at all. I wasn't happy, I mean, to hear about it, but I can't say I was surprised. We often see that when, you know, and healthcare and medicine is something government is so intertwined with. And what happens, the more involved government is with something, the more they are regulating it, mandating it, subsidizing it, taxing it, and all those things, combinations of those things, creating, you know, red tape and restrictions around it and everything else. The more expensive it gets, the fewer options you have, the worse the actual outcome is in the use of it. And the more it becomes something that you have to do or aren't allowed to do, the less it becomes a choice, and the more it becomes a mandate or de facto mandate, a coerced choice, like we're seeing with this stuff with these kids. Separate. There needs to be a separation of everything from the state. Definitely medicine from the state. Definitely parenting from the state. Definitely your basic liberties to travel freely to the store or to visit your loved ones, and the state. There's no compelling reason to have the government involved in that. And one last thing, because I know you have other stuff you want to talk about, but one last thing on this. I remember early on in the you know, when they were talking about the pandemic and the lockdowns, And I was always like, I was immediately against lockdowns just because I don't want government to ever have that ability, whether or not it's a good idea. But at the time, I'm like, I don't know if this is a good idea. If it's been recommended, maybe it's a good idea to do, but I certainly don't want the government to be saying it. This was early on, first week or so. And then they kept saying, we just want to do lockdowns to bend the curve. And then hopefully when the warmer months come in, then the virus will stop spreading. And I went, wait a second. It's sort of triggered a curiosity of like, wait a second. My understanding is that cold and flu season isn't during the colder months because it's cold. But why is that? Why is it that cold and flu season is worse during the colder months? And so I looked it up. It's because we're inside more often. We're in our poorly ventilated homes with our closest loved ones. We aren't outside. We only go outside and spend as little time getting to where we need to go because it's cold. And we only venture outside to get the basic things we need, which is what literally everyone else is doing. And we go into the same areas, all of us at the same time. And we're also stressed out because of the holidays, and we're stressed out. We're less happy because there's less sunlight, and we're not getting vitamin D, and all of that. And then we get all the different viruses and bugs everyone's been spreading at the places that everyone's at. And then we go back to our poorly ventilated homes to share all that with our closest loved ones. In other words, the lockdowns, which are literally all of that, you shouldn't be going outside more than you absolutely have to. It should only be to go where everyone else is going. And in fact, we're actually going to curfew so that you can only go. You can't go to Walmart at 2 a.m. when no one's there. You have to go when everyone else is there. And then you get whatever they've got and you spread it back to your family, and you're stressed out and not going outside because we don't let you. And you're stressed out because we're telling you you're going to die if you step the wrong way. And also you got less vitamin D because you're not outside and you're stressed out and you're living. And yet somehow the lockdowns didn't work. And I remember I was one of the first people, and I think it was like in like late March or early April, where I said on social media, these lockdowns recreate the conditions of cold and flu season. And even if they did slow the curve, you got to let us outside again at some point. And that means it's just going to start spreading again. So whichever way it is, this isn't going to work. And I remember the pushback I got on it, including from a lot of libertarians who were like, well, the experts are saying that, well, what are you, a doctor? And I'm like, challenge what I just said. Like, this is, if cold and flu season happens because of these conditions and the lockdowns impose those conditions on you, including the lower vitamin D and the higher stress and everything in between, how on earth is this not going to make it worse? And that was before I even knew about how they were, paying doctors to use ventilators and use specific interventions, which it turns out actually increase the likelihood of people dying. I didn't even know that stuff yet. I just knew on the lockdown side, at worst, at best, it delayed the inevitable. And at worst, it was making things worse. It was actually making sure people got the virus and spread it. And, again, I didn't have any faith that government was going to do the right thing then, but it just drove home that government will often create the worst possible way to deal with things because of a combination of ineptitude and perverse incentive where they actually come out ahead the worse things are.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of points that need to be discussed. Just the basic point, it's multifactorial, this whole cold and flu stuff, but it's known that if you have vitamin D levels above 50 nanograms per milliliter, you're unlikely to seriously suffer from a viral illness to any significant degree. So in the beginning of the pandemic, they didn't promote nutraceuticals or anything like that. And they didn't promote vitamin D, sunlight, things like that. So the mishandling of the pandemic was unscientific as it relates to the COVID vaccine and biologic, which should have never been given to any human because it's not safe or effective and it doesn't prevent transmission. They should have never been recommending flu vaccine because it increases coronavirus susceptibility. But the other thing, the reason why we're in this situation is because in 1986, a law was passed removing all product liability from vaccine and biologics and establishing the vaccine adverse event reporting system and the healthcare compensation fund, for which $7 billion has been paid out to the vaccine injuries that you don't know about. And according to their own analysis, the Lazarus report, only 1 to 10% of those cases are even reported. And the PrEP Act that gave product liability protection and protection for those who administer the COVID vaccine and biologics, and established the COVID countermeasure injury program, which you have to report your injury for a year. And the reason why this is important is because there were serious issues in the clinical trials about safety, efficacy, and lack of prevention of transmission, which I already said you cannot prevent transmission with respiratory viral vaccines and biologic, is that that's quintessential government interference in the free market, because safety is driven by fear of being sued. And vaccine makers and one other entity, the guys who come when you have a bridge that falls, the National Civil Engineering Group, they have
Corps of Engineers.
Corps of Engineers and the vaccine makers and biologic makers are the only two entities that have product liability or action liability protection in these United States. And since that has happened, the vaccine schedule has quadrupled, with no safety studies in 30 years on the current vaccine schedule. And so the issue is that these would have never been given to anybody, because there's millions of people with vaccine injuries if they didn't have product liability protection, because the pharmaceutical industry wouldn't have let them be released. And the reason why they passed a law in 1986 removing product liability was because they were getting sued for injury for the vaccine that they were already making, which were like a few, and Congress in its infinite wisdom gave them liability protection instead of pushing them for more safety and efficacious vaccines. So again, COVID mania tyranny in many levels, and there was a lot of episodes of Crimes Against Humanity that we'll see what happens in the future of quintessential government interference in the free market, leading to profound harm to these Americans in this country. Sorry for the rant.
No, and it's 100% correct. The reason that passed, as you said, was because they said, we can't keep making these if we keep getting sued. Well, yeah, look at your model, guys. Like if I have a product, let's say it's a chicken. I always like to use chicken sandwiches. People make fun of me. Anytime I'm talking about a product, I go to chicken sandwiches. Something I can't eat, by the way, because of my
right.
autoimmune restrictive diet. There's not a single component of a chicken sandwich I can eat. But anyway, so my chicken sandwich, if my chicken sandwich, I keep getting sued because the people are getting sick from it or dying or having like permanent I need to change the way I'm making my chicken sandwiches. And because if I go, well, I got to charge $5,000 for each of these chicken sandwiches and no one's going to pay that for it. Well, yeah, no, maybe you need to make it safer. And so if lawsuits are happening and rewards are being paid out because of verifiable demonstrated harms that are being caused by a product, whatever it is, the way to fix that isn't even for the government to get involved and say, you have to do this, you have to do that, because that could backfire too. The answer to that is the industry needs to make it safer. Like if this is truly a necessary product, whatever it is, and it needs to exist and it needs to be on the market, but it's causing significant harm to the point where it could bankrupt the company, then they have to change their model. They have to change what that product is in order to address that. And at no point should that product be mandated, because first of all, we shouldn't be mandating products at all. But we certainly shouldn't be mandating products that are facing bankruptcy because of how much they're having to pay out to people that are being harmed by it. And we definitely don't need to be mandating products that the government, you want to talk about an easy way to make money. Imagine having a product where the government subsidizes the cost of its development and then says that you can't get sued for liability from it, and then mandates that people have to take it. That's about as close to easy money as I can think of. And that's what Big Pharma is. And I don't think we've talked about it during this episode, but it should be briefly mentioned. This is what happens with regulations. If I'm in the, again, my chicken sandwich empire, and the government says we need a department of chicken sandwiches because this guy's been making some really terrible sandwiches and it's killing people, and so they make their department of chicken sandwiches, and I go, and so they have the very real potential to regulate me out of, specifically not just my industry but my company, out of existence. And so if only for my own survival, I got to make friends and connections in that agency. I need to do everything I can to get good with those agents and become really familiar with those agents and the people in charge of them and the politicians that are appointing people to them, and the officials, and maybe even try to get some of my outgoing chicken sandwich executives into that agency, because we're experts on chicken sandwiches, so we can definitely help to regulate the greater market. Initially, for no other reason than to just protect our company from extinction, from being regulated out of extinction. Well, fast forward not that long after. Wait, I don't. This isn't just survival. I can get rid of my competition. I can mandate my product. I can get protection for liability. I can get subsidies till the cows come home for my product. I can get the regulations made so high that the barrier to entry into the chicken sandwich market is so high that all the mom and pop chicken sandwich shops are gone for good. And it's just me and maybe a couple of other of my friends that have large competing companies. It's called regulatory capture. It is the equivalent of the antibiotic or the bacteria getting its way around the antibiotic. The company, if again, for no other reason than to survive, captures the agency. And it's the most corrupt and most prone to do that kind of behavior type of people and companies that are going to be the most successful in capturing those agencies. So the more you regulate a given market or sector or service or product or whatever else, the more you're inevitably going to make sure that the worst actors float to the top and that the best actors probably get removed entirely, or at the very least they're pushed down to the bottom. And that's what regulations look like. On a smaller micro scale, what we're doing with You Are the Power is showing when you give government power, when there's more regulations, when you give them more money for programs to help you, it always ends the same way. There's the bad actors are going to make friends with their bad actors. The bad actors in the private sector are going to make friends with the bad actors in the public sector, and they're going to find ways to benefit themselves even if it means to the detriment of others. I briefly mentioned that there were threats against people, against charities that were feeding people and helping people that were in need get back on their feet. In many of those cases, the reason it was happening was, and there were some of those charities that had been doing it for years, no one cared. But then what happened was some of those COVID funds were about to expire. And the cities that had been sitting on all that money had to use it for an approved purpose. One of those approved purpose was to help with the homelessness crisis. Well, what do? When you got a bunch of money you got to spend on the homelessness crisis. You find a big NGO or nonprofit that you can partner with. Well, here's the problem with that. If there's not a homelessness crisis, then the city's going to say, the residents are going to say, why are you spending all this money on something that's being dealt with by people voluntarily? What's the problem here? So what do? You make it illegal to help them. Now suddenly there's a homelessness crisis and people are dying on the streets. We saw it in Gastonia, North Carolina. We saw it in in West Virginia. We saw it in Columbia, South Carolina. It's the same thing over and over again. And very often in at least one of those cases, two of those cases, it was tied to the city wanted to spend a bunch of money with an NGO. And that's just another version of regulatory capture. It's capture of access to funds, and one of the many ancillary harms that are caused by it are people that were doing that to begin with and not asking for a penny from the taxpayer were rewarded with threats of arrest.
Right. And that's just, again, another example of how government needs to get out of the way so that individuals can help society in the most decentralized manner. Because that's exactly the point. And, you were talking about regulatory capture. Just for the audience to understand specifically as it relates to pharmaceutical industry, the CDC Foundation is partially funded by the pharmaceutical industry and partially funds the CDC that has no governing authority. So, you know, the whole welcome to your healthcare sector. So that's why we have the highest expenditures and the sickest population. We are completely beyond the path of health and wellness related to proper nutrition. We need food freedom. We need food that's actually food. And we need the path to health and wellness lies in biochemical order, homeostasis, and a healthy microbiome. And the answer is not in our captured health industry. So there's a lot of work to be done. But, you know, the point that we were talking about as it relates to You on the Power is that every time you have a case that's won, and you have a lot of followers on your social media, and then you explain the importance and with your funny tweets, you know, what was your tweet with the squirrel, Peanut the squirrel, which I don't know if you want to talk about Peanut the squirrel.
Oh, well, yeah, Peanut the squirrel and Fred the raccoon. You had some folks in New York that had taken in a stray raccoon and a stray squirrel in somewhere in upstate New York, and they created like a TikTok and YouTube or whatever for them, and they were beloved. Everyone loved Peanut the squirrel Peanut the squirrel and Fred the raccoon, and I think they may have had others as well, but you know, everyone loved them, and some person
Karen,
some person in I think Texas, like not even in New York, someone looked it up and saw that it was illegal to own squirrels and raccoons in New York, and so she called their like Department of Natural Resources or whatever it is for them in New York, and they came with an armed raid of the home and killed the squirrel and the raccoon. And because of what it was, these two beloved pets that were harming no one being killed, everyone was up in arms. And so I think initially I said, you know, without government, who would murder your squirrel or something like that. But then, you know, I did another post and I said, well, I also did the post and it was a picture of someone giving because if you hand anything to a raccoon, they'll reach out for it. So there's a photo of someone handing a handgun to a raccoon. And so I gave the raccoon laser eyes and I put the caption, armed animals are harder to euthanize or something like that. So I had some fun with it, but I seriously put up a thing saying, you know, this isn't just about a squirrel and a raccoon. People are realizing that if the government will, the same human beings, because we say the government, the same individual human beings who only needed an excuse to conduct an armed raid on a completely peaceful family for the sole purpose of stealing and killing their pets, those same exact people would have no problem doing that to you and your pets, or to your children, or to you personally, and killing you, arresting you, whatever. All they need is an excuse.
Yes,
they were told,
exactly.
They were told, kill this squirrel, kill this raccoon because XYZ, they violated code, whatever. And then, okay, I doubt any of them were, maybe I'm wrong, but I doubt any of them were like, but is that the only option? No, they were told, do this, and we have a perfectly good reason to do so, for you to do so, and they did. And it goes back to the lab coat experiment and the Milgram experiment, now all the other experiments. There is a certain subset of human beings that if you say, do this horrific thing because I said so, trust me, this is what you need to do, they won't even wait for you to say, trust me. You told them to do it and they'll do it. And that's the problem. Yes, this time it was a squirrel and a raccoon. Next time it could have been someone's pet dog. Next time it could have been someone's kid or an adult who again didn't do anything wrong, but they may have been suspected of violating bylaw subsection LQFY2, and now they're being killed in their home by armed police because they had the excuse to do so. That's the problem.
No, that is the problem. But just for fun and games, it looks like the medical part of it is also wrong. And I don't have confirmation, but apparently the raccoon, who had been indoors for a very long time, is my understanding, and had no behavioral signs of rabies, bit the investigator, probably because it was scared because the guy was an investigator or whoever taking him out. And for fear of rabies, apparently, I don't have confirmation on this, so we'd have to double check it, but this is what I have been told, so I don't want to, but if this is the case, this is really messed up from a medical perspective. Decided that he was a rabies risk and euthanized him instead of quarantining him, excuse me. So, but just think about it. The fear of the imaginary virus that he may have had. I mean, there are some profound corollaries here if that seems to be the case. And even if that's not the case, it's something to really think about, right? Because the cooties that he had that he was going to give everybody, but he had no sign of illness. You cannot spread disease if you're not sick. Just saying. But do you see how there's a lot of corollaries there?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, how many times have we heard of people's, pet dogs getting shot because they barked? I mean, it is. And yeah, going back to specifically the medical part of it. I've seen, this is what rabies looks like videos. They're not just frothing at the mouth. It's not just they bit you. There's like twitching and like there's a whole, they look like zombies. Like there's obviously something wrong. And like you said, a quarantine period could have proven that. He already bit the person, the agent or officer or whoever it was. So, okay, you give that person, preventative shots just in case or whatever, I'm not sure how that works. If they do a quarantine and then confirm they have rabies and then do the shots, or they do the shots just as a be safe thing, whatever it is, that thing already happened. It's not like you're like, oh, this raccoon is a threat to the public. The raccoon bit someone, a stranger who seized it, while the owners are freaking out or being, manhandled or whatever. Like, yeah, that's a natural thing for an animal to do in that circumstance.
But he wasn't frothing at the mouth, hanging out.
It wasn't frothing at the mouth and twitching or anything like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And that's, but honestly, even if that wasn't in play, it could have been, again, the dog ran at me and barked. Yeah, with its tail wagging because it's a dog and you're in its yard. And, you're going to shoot every dog that barks at you? And the answer is that we've found cops that straight up, they will shoot every dog that runs up to them and barks. They shoot a non-zero number of dogs every year for the 20 years that, 20 plus years that they're serving. There are cops out there who have literally killed in their career dozens of dogs for what? And here's why, because they're scared of dogs. And so instead of writing, I'm scared of dogs, so I shot it, the dog was coming right at me and it was, going to kill me or whatever. And it's not, no, you're scared of dogs. So I don't know, get another job where you're not around people's pets all day long.
Right. But, if people are afraid of all my cooties that I may have that I'm not sick from during COVID mania tyranny, how did they treat the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated? Because we had cooties, which you cannot spread disease if you're not sick. There's so many corollaries here. So people need to be really careful that what happened during that time was a warning sign and that it can never happen again. We can't give up our God-given unalienable rights.
And we also need to keep stock of the fact it could have gotten so much worse. You don't even have to look at like China or North Korea, where North Korea killed anyone who tested positive, or China was welding doors shut and getting people stuck in their giant apartment buildings and stuff, and they couldn't leave. Just look at Australia and how much more restrictive they were in a first world, ostensibly civil rights respecting, liberal democracy. Like, that's not supposed to happen. And it not only happened, but a significant amount of the public was freaking out. And I mean, I remember they would, someone that was suspected of having COVID would be rounded up and forced to wear a hazmat suit and all this stuff. And it's like, And we're over here going, that's so ridiculous. Why are they doing that? I'm like, because they want to scare the people watching it. It's not as scary if they're just making them wear like a face mask, or, you know, they don't make them wear anything because they know they're not a threat. No, you got to make them put on something that makes them look like toxic waste, and that they just, you know, they're trying to get them out of a nuclear power plant and hopefully no one touches them so they don't die too. They got to make it look like the scariest thing ever. And it's all driven by fear, you know, whether or not, you know, because I've met people who are like, yeah, you know, the lockdowns were wrong in retrospect, but it was, you know, really disconcerting, all the people that were out there saying, I'm still going to live my life. And it's like, no, those people are the reason why they didn't set up camps like they did in Australia. Those people are the reason why they didn't mandate everyone have, you know, tracing apps on your phone where they'd round you up if your GPS data was a little bit off, and instead of being, you know, 30 feet away from someone with COVID who drove by your house, it thought that you were 5 feet away, and now you're in the dreaded 6-foot zone, and now they got to round you up and put you in a not camp, which looks like a camp, for, you know, 2 weeks and check to see if you develop signs of COVID. All of those things happened in Australia. Could have happened here, but we had a significant number of people who were straight up like, I don't care if this is the deadliest thing ever and I'll die going outside, I'm going outside. Or,
Yes.
or at the very least, I'll decide if I'm going outside or not. You know, if you don't like that attitude, I understand why someone might not like that attitude. It's people with that kind of attitude, which are why we didn't get it nearly, those restrictions nearly as bad as even Canada. You don't even have to go to the other side of the planet. Canada, it's way worse than us in most places. And again, it was because we had a significant population of people who reflexively responded to, you know, you shouldn't, you shouldn't go outside for now, by going outside even more. I remember when our lockdowns were comparatively not that bad, but one of the things they said, you can't go to the beach unless you own oceanfront property. Then it's safe. So I went to the beach every day. It was March. Like, it wasn't beach weather yet, but I was at the beach walking every day. The first time they gave me a hard time, and then after that they stopped even being at their checkpoint. But I went just about every single day, and it was to drive home a point. First of all, there was no risk. I'm surrounded. I've got, you know, UV rays above me and saline below me. I'm in like the least dangerous place for pathogens ever. But also, like, and there's no one else around, and there's breeze carrying all the, you know, the viruses. So there's no big viral load that you can get hit with, like when you're inside, where they wanted you to be. But it was more to just drive the point home. I'm going to be, you know, oh, I can't do this. I'm going to do this. I'm no risk to anyone or myself, and I'm going to do it. And it's that kind of attitude that made them, our restrictions ended way before they were supposed to. It was nowhere near 30 days. And it's why many other states didn't get a lot worse than they did. It would have been much worse here if there weren't enough of your fellow, loved ones and you know, fellow Americans and neighbors out there who reflexively were like, I'm not going to do this because you told me to do it.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very important point that you're making. I find it interesting. I also was at the beach for 3 months, reverse commuted back to the northern part of the state. And we had our convention and the first Liberty Speaks one still under partial restrictions in Delaware that you guys all came to spoke to.
Yep.
Because Delaware, of course, is Delaware. And we had restrictions for a long time. That's why it was outside in the winery.
Yes.
Because we didn't.
When it was like 90 something degrees outside, and I'm watching people having to like cycle. There were people cycling, you know, here, you can sit here now. I'm going to go in the air conditioning for a little bit. And which is funny because then you had people huddled together in an air conditioner, you know, the very thing that they didn't want us to do. And, we were out there, and I'm thinking, like, I am concerned some people are going to get sunstroke, you know, for their safety, for their health and their safety. But yeah, it's the last people that you should, the last people you should trust to reduce suffering or harm at any time, but especially during a crisis. The last people you should trust are the only ones who have an incentive for there to be more suffering. Because if there's more suffering, they can pass more laws and spend more money. and raise and take more of your money from you and run up more debt and create more restrictions and agencies and programs and everything else, and then use your suffering to grandstand on and say they need even more control and more of this and more of that. Those are the last people you should trust. And it's not because those individuals are like that. It's because the organizational structure lends itself towards the incentivization of crisis, which is
Exactly.
why that type of an organization, if it is to exist at all, should exist for the most basic functions that we decide that a government is necessary to have, namely the affirmation and defense of lives, rights, and property.
Right.
Not meaning I'm going to tell you how to live for your life or for your safety, but I'm going to punish people who murder. I'm going to punish people who assault or steal or violate you in any other way. I'm going to exist as a coercive entity that can punish people for that, with the intent of trying to dissuade people from doing that, deter people from doing that, and then maybe some other basic corollary functions. I'm not one of those people that thinks they should even be involved in things like infrastructure, because that looks like them stealing properties and, so that the contractors can make the most money possible. Government involvement ensures more suffering, more expense, and worse outcomes than you would get if the government wasn't involved.
Yeah, exactly. And people will say that us saying that government shouldn't build the roads, but who will build the roads? But Milei is privatizing the roads in Argentina. And so you can privatize anything, and you make some very important points. And that is the point of a lot of libertarian concepts. Yeah. The government is really supposed to work for us for those few just laws that protect us from certain things that we agree on, like murder and stealing and things like that you explained.
Yep.
And that it is really working for us by the consent of the governed. And I still don't understand how both the decision makers and the people lost their logic minds during COVID mania tyranny. Like, the putting your mask on in the restaurant and then taking it off while you're eating, like, that's not logical. Okay. I'm just saying, like, no, I
remember one of the times I was on Kennedy and they were talking about that. And I think because usually the way they'd have it was they'd have like a conservative Republican and they'd have like a progressive liberal and they'd have me. And it was always funny watching, depending on what subject we were talking on, whichever one, the liberal or the conservative that agreed with me, would be like, yeah. And the other one who disagreed with me, when they saw that I understood this usually far better than they did, they'd just get really quiet. and they'd often get conciliatory. They'd be like, well, he's brought up some interesting points. I just think blah, blah, blah. So it was always like, which one's going to fawn and which one's going to crumble? And it was like a thing. But on this one, the subject of, it was overall talking about COVID restrictions. And at some point, maybe I brought it up. I said, you got to wear a mask. They're telling you have to wear a mask when you're inside, but not when you're sitting to eat. COVID's a virus, not a monster. And it was like, and it was the fact that you could tell someone that you could say, okay, so you have to wear the mask all the way to here. And then in some, like in California, they said you can't get up. So when you were, so you could sit down and take your mask off, obviously, but you couldn't get up to go to the bar, and you couldn't get up to talk to other people at other tables because you could spread this very deadly airborne virus, which, as you know, when a virus is airborne, that means that if you're sitting over there and I'm here, as long as I don't walk over there, you're fine, right? Because that's how airborne works. It has to be, right here. But I could walk to go to the bathroom, in which case I'd walk right by you. And I suppose if I continued walking, I could say hi. And I could obviously walk to leave. but I couldn't go to the bar, and I couldn't go over to say hi to someone else, and I had to wear my mask if I was standing, but not if I was sitting, because viruses don't, it's once you're below that like 4-foot mark or whatever, you're okay. It was just, and you would tell someone that and they'd say, yeah, but they're just trying to keep us safe. But how does this keep us safe? Like
it doesn't.
I think it was, and I've gone through this before, when I talk with people about the war on drugs, when I talk to people about, anti-terrorism stuff, surveillance or whatever, I'm very often, or economic intervention, stimulus spending, healthcare spending, but it's very often like where I'm just encouraging them to actually think. But this one just felt like something that like you could say, because it's hard, you try to explain like federal monetary policy or something. I can see where it gets a little wonky. If you stand up, you're a danger to everyone. But if you sit down, you're okay. That's something that if I say that to like a 7-year-old, they're going to go, that's stupid. But then you say it to a 30-year-old or a 60-year-old and they go, look, it's just for our safety. And I realized that, and all right, I guess it further drove home what I already knew. In those moments, when you present someone with something that nonsensical and their response is, look, they're trying to keep us safe. It's for our safety. Just, do the best you can to keep it. What they're saying is, I am scared. My hope lies in the idea that they're keeping us safe. And I don't want to challenge that because now I don't feel safe at all. And
yes.
It's like, I don't want to even think about what you're saying, because if I truly do look at it and unravel it, and it turns out this whole thing is safety theater, then that means I'm actually not safe from this virus. And I actually am primarily responsible for keeping myself healthy and safe. And based on what they've told me, that's the worst case scenario. And I am scared. Now, if I could get them to fully think that through, if we've established that you can't trust these people about what they're saying on the restrictions, then what do you want to bet you can't trust them on what they said initially about the virus and your safety to begin with? But that's, people have become conditioned that when the experts, meaning the government, are speaking, you just have to take it. So it's a lot of conditioning we're dealing with. And that's another part of why I started with You Are the Power. I don't know that I or we at this moment have the wherewithal. Maybe we do. But I don't know that we have the wherewithal to convince people at the macro national level that, of these ideas about, government intervention being bad. Or at the very least, if we do have that wherewithal, it's going to take a lot of heavy lifting for sometimes diminishing returns in terms of getting people to join us. And then we might lose them on the next thing that scares them. Maybe they're not scared of viruses, but they're scared of terrorism. Maybe they're not scared of terrorism, but they're scared of immigrants. Whatever it is, they're going to have that thing that scares them and brings them right back to authoritarianism. But if I can show them a mother who's being arrested because her kid walked to town 1,000 feet away, or 2,000 feet, whatever, or I show them a family who brought their fussy child, a sick child, to the hospital, and turns out the kid has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or rickets, or something like that, and the government knew that the kid was sick and realized that they can maximize the amount of money they get by calling it abuse, trafficking the child away from them forever, and then disclosing that the kid's sick because they get even more money then. If I can show people that, rarely, almost never do I have people go, yeah, but they're doing that to keep kids safe. Pretty much never. I almost never have anyone say, yeah, but the cops, they have privacy too. That's why they can't release that body cam footage that would say whether or not they had assaulted this person, or whether they were arrested correctly or not, or for an actual reason or not. That doesn't happen because I don't make it this big national thing. I don't tie specific politicians or political parties to that. That makes everyone demented and deranged. I talk about someone that closely, I talk about someone that could be you, could be your your relative, could be your neighbor, just a regular everyday person whose life is being upended. And all the evidence shows that there's no good reason for this to happen other than some government official had the ability to do this, and they're doing it. And so by doing that, not only am I creating, and that's something we can actually win on. I don't know that we're going to be able to convince, convince Trump not to have a net increase of taxes through this tariff stuff that he wants to do. I don't know that we'll be able to convince him of that, but I bet we can convince the mayor of such and such town to back off of stealing someone's house. We can convince, a family court judge that they really need to take a look at this case and leave this poor mother alone or this poor family alone. That we do it all the time. We've done it many, many times. So we have attainable, winnable goals that get people excited to stay involved so they can win even more and help people even more. And along the way, as we're doing that, we just keep showing them over and over again. Here's another example of what happens when you let government be more involved in your lives. Here's another example of what happens when you give government money to solve a problem or to help with something. Here's another example of what happens when we aren't demanding that the government respect us as individual human beings and not try to treat us as obstacles or opportunities, but actually as human beings and let us live our lives the way we see fit. And they may be doing it just to be involved and just to help. They may not consider themselves libertarian or small government or anarchist or any of that. They may not. They may consider. They might have just. They might right now be lamenting the fact that Kamala Harris didn't get elected, but they're helping us with these causes because they feel good about it, and they are consistently getting the same message over and over again. This is what happens when government's not respecting you as an individual human being. This is what happens when we defer to government officials instead of asserting ourselves and demanding that we be respected as individual human beings. And not only that, but we encourage them, because very often people don't have their own words to express displeasure. And that can end poorly because they can then say really just start swearing at this person, which I'm not necessarily, I understand that they do that, but maybe I can give them some proactive wording they can use, some useful wording. So we actually give them a link to our website where they can go, and there's a template for wording that they can borrow from or just copy paste and add their name to it. And now not only are they hearing what we say about this is what happens when you don't respect people as individual human beings, they're saying it themselves. They're now echoing it. They're encouraging their loved ones to join them in echoing this wording about respecting people as individual human beings. They're now not only consumers of this information, they are propagators of this information. It's now something they believe and are sharing with others. And it's amazing what happens when someone thinks something is their idea. Now they're much more likely to believe it and defend it because it was their idea. It was something they said. And so we are bringing people in. And if nothing else, we're getting them to help us on these individual causes. But along the way, many of them are continuously and consistently and increasingly understanding the underlying message behind all of this and then spreading it themselves. And that's the real magic. That's when things really change. And that's what's happening. We're seeing that more and more, where people on their own provoked, unchallenged to do so, not even given a script, they're saying these things. They're saying they should have never gotten involved with that. Why is the city even doing such a thing? And it's a magic thing to watch. So again, if you want to be involved, youarethepower.net. We need members. We need people that help us find out about these causes. We need people that can help create rallies and help to spread the word about these causes. If you're in a position to do so, we need the resources, the funds to be able to keep the bills paid and to have our full-time staff that spends upwards of 60 hours vetting all of these causes to make sure they're legit and that we can create a good plan of action of how to fight for them to get the justice they deserve. However you can help, we'd love to have you be a part of it. If you go to youarethepower.net, we'd love to have you.
That's just wonderful, Spike. And it's just such a win-win situation while you push the Liberty Overton window, because as we look at this world as a social organism, everybody who has these interactions with you then tells their friends, and it changes their mindset and their perception of their world experience. And so you're really pushing the Liberty Overton window by actually helping people. So your organization is such a perfect quintessential example of taking human action and actually pushing what we need to do to make this world freer and smarter, because I think a lot of this has to do with education, and you're educating people as you actually help them in these terrible experiences. So I just think it's such an incredible organization. You guys can get involved at youarethepower.net. I know some of the people that work on your team, some of them are friends of mine, and they're just such blessings as well. Donate, get involved, or if you have a case. And I do understand you do significantly vet your cases, because the point is that you really, the track record is very important. You have to really pick the cases that you can validate. And I understand that.
We only have to screw up once or twice, especially when it comes to stuff like allegations of child abuse. The first time that we had an allegation of child abuse that, you know, was brought to us first, which was the Hernandez family. The other one, the family in Texas that had already been vetted by other people, we kind of jumped in and kind of helped do that final push to get baby Mila back home to her family. But on the one, the Hernandez family, we were going to be the ones breaking this. I said, we need to make sure we understand this thing stem to stern, and, you know, forget beyond a reasonable doubt. I want to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that what we're saying is correct. Bad enough if I misrepresent a case of like eminent domain or zoning abuse or something like that. It's bad enough. I don't want to do that either. Child abuse,
right?
Whether or not a kid was abused, I'm like, we need to vet. And so our criteria for vetting is so substantial. Like I said, we spend upwards of 60 hours vetting our causes. We want to have, there are causes that have been brought to our attention where it's very likely that they're in the right and the officials are in the wrong, but they just don't quite have enough documentation to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. And we've had to tell people, look, there's not enough here. We will, you know, if there's someone we can help line you up with to help you in court, you know, we are working on other causes like yours, so hopefully that will help yours as well. If you can find more, you know, if you're able to get the things that we're requesting that you don't have right now, we can always revisit it. But right now we can't do it because we need to make sure, especially when it comes to allegations of child abuse or anything like that, we have to make sure all of our I's are dotted, all of our T's are crossed, you know, that there's no loose ends here. So we are very, very, like, our vetting, I think, is second to none at this point. And we're continuing to you know, to streamline it, and to make it better and better. But even as it is right now, the amount of evidence we have, I always laugh when I'll put up something and people go, we're not hearing the whole story. And I will occasionally respond and I'll say, like, we have literally hundreds of pages of evidence. If you'd like to see it, you know, some of it is stuff we can't share because of, you know, sensitive information or whatever. But if you'd like, we can send you like a white paper, but, you know, like a synopsis of it, if you feel like reading dozens of pages of information about, you know, the timeline and everything else. I've distilled this down so it's something you're willing to consume on social media. But if you'd like the small book we can write about it, then I'd be happy to give that to you. But yeah, we are very, very thorough. If a cause is being taken on by us, you can rest assured it has been so heavily vetted by people that are now very, very proficient in that vetting process. But love to have you be a part of it at youarethepower.net.
Yeah, it's just such a important organization, Spike. I have cried at many of your cases, so we're not going to get me all sappy. And it is not risk-free. It's not risk-free. You putting your reputation on the line, and you organize it, especially it takes some big cojones to get involved in these child abuse case. You know,
we're disrupting an industry here. And I mean, we're working on trying to create model legislation to fix it at the funding, because that we have to go after the purse strings. We can get this family reunited and this family reunited, but for everyone we can reunite, there's going to be, you know, 50 more that we couldn't reunite, or actually much more than that. And until we fix the funding there. So no, we're disrupting an industry. You mentioned how, you know, the causes get you sad and make you cry. They do with us as well. And we actually started on our causes. We started shortly after the initial synopsis of, like, we'll say, this is such and such with their kids, so and so. The government took their children from them because they have a health condition. They refuse to acknowledge it, or whatever. Like a real, like a one sentence explanation of what happened, and then I'll say, you can help. At the end, I'll tell you how, or skip to the end to find out how. But here's all the information. So for the people, because I've had people who are like, listen, just tell me where to go and where to sign it. I can't read these anymore. Like it's too much. It hurts my heart. And I'm like, okay, so we started adding that because we have some people who are like, listen, tell me what email address to send this to. Tell me what phone number to call. Tell me where to show up for the rally. But I can't read another story. Like I cannot cry at work anymore. So tell me. So we actually have structured it that way. But anyway, I know you had other questions you wanted to get to about outside of You Are the Power. So.
Yeah, well, we could probably talk about this for, like a marathon, You Are the Power telethon, and, get some music on and just keep going.
Like, maybe we should Jerry Lewis of,
we could do like a You Are the Power. If you want to do it, we'll do it with you. We can do like a fundraiser telethon and have a powerthon. You Are the Powerthon. And we can get some of, like Jordan Page and those guys to come and do music, and some other people. If you want to do it with Liberty Speaks, we could do it. Something, I don't know, me and you have these ideas, but I'm happy to do it.
We'll have to do something. And I think I should do like how, because Jerry Lewis, when he would do those, what was it? Muscular dystrophy, Jerry's kids.
Yeah. Telethon.
He would, at least when he was younger, he wouldn't sleep during the entire thing. And he could have gone and taken it, but he wouldn't. And he became increasingly punchy as it went on, and would increasingly say things that were, because this was live on public television. This was before the 6-second delay and all that. And he would say increasingly, like, this is a nightclub comic, right? Like he's, doing this great wholesome thing, but he would become increasingly like blue, especially for that time, when he was younger in the 70s and 80s or whatever. And it would get worse and worse and worse. Like when he would come up, it would become increasingly punchy and ridiculous what he would say. And then they'd have, someone else come and speak or whatever. But so I could do that. I could be like, yep, I'm going to stay up for the next, 24 hours. Come on every, 40 minutes or so. And you can watch the map of me becoming increasingly ridiculous as that goes along.
Yeah, but we can get a couple more people on here, and we could get like phones, get like funny people from the party to answer phones, have them on the screen and have the phone ringing, and then have music and stuff. Well, let me know. We can do it online. I think it would be super funny.
Yeah, we should do something like that in the future. Yeah,
we should do it. But we do want to talk a little bit, because you are incredibly knowledgeable in the political arena, especially as it relates to libertarian principles. And of course, as you know, Donald Trump is now our president-elect.
I did hear that, yeah.
Did you hear? I'm not sure. You live under a rock. But anyway, so there's a couple of things that are interesting. My perspective is that, and I tweeted this, that it looks like the Amish libertarians and independents decided to pick the possibility of freedom versus the likelihood of enslavement. That's my perspective as to what happened during the election, because, our libertarian candidate got a low percentage of the vote. But he has some cabinet picks and some promises. He has some promises to free Ross. He announced it he was at our libertarian convention. So was Kennedy. That room was very interesting. I was there when he spoke, and he got a lot of boos from libertarians.
That was the most entertaining political spectacle I've personally been to. And I go to libertarian events, which are quintessentially entertaining political spectacles. And the man, whatever you think about Donald Trump, you think he's the greatest politician ever, you think he's the worst person ever, whatever, you cannot deny he is one of the greatest entertainers ever. We had basically front row seats, and I couldn't get enough. People booing and cheering, and he's eating it up, and couldn't phase him at all. And at one point he says he would say something that we'd agree with, and we'd go, yes, yeah, we agree, whatever. We'd cheer, or we'd clap, just whatever, whatever he would say. And then you go, and that's why you have to vote for me to stop Joe Biden, the worst president ever. And, we'd boo and like, no, we're not voting for you. And one of the times he did it, one of the times he said it, he went, only if you want to win. Only if you want to win. You want to get your 3% and, lose and feel good about it. That's fine. Don't vote for me. But if you want to win, then you vote for me. And I could not stop laughing. I just thought it was, the comic timing. And there was one point where it's like he knew when we'd boo and he was cool with it. But there was one time when he mentioned getting the endorsement of the NRA. And we booed that because we're like, the NRA sucks.
He doesn't know. He doesn't know.
He didn't know. He didn't know that that's not like, we don't like them. And so he goes, that's why I'm proud to have the A+ endorsement of the NRA. And we're like, boo, the NRA. and he did this. He wasn't really phased, but he was definitely like, he went like that. And it was the one time where he's like, that wasn't what I was expecting. I think he was fully expecting. We're like, yeah, the NRA, or what? We'd clap or whatever. And so we're like, boo. It's like one of the loudest boos he got. And I'm sure he was like, I'm sure he went back afterwards. He's like, I thought these people like guns. What was the problem with the NRA? Yeah, no, that was incredible. It was absolutely a spectacle. And here's the thing: before there, and after there. Because there was some question, well, okay, if he's not handed the nomination, the Libertarian nomination on a silver platter, is he going to continue saying he's going to do this stuff? Is he going to keep saying he's going to free Ross? Is he going to keep saying he's going to end the Department of Education? Is he going to keep saying that he's, going to deregulate on crypto and end the federal government's war on crypto? Is he going to continue saying he wants to, deeply deregulate in other sectors and stuff like that? Is he going to do that, or is he going to just pivot even harder towards the more populist stuff that we don't like? He stayed with it. Now, that's not a guarantee that he's going to do it. He was in office before, and there were things he said he would do that he didn't. Like, I remember him saying he was going to eliminate the national debt, which no one, including him, thought he was going to actually do. And then instead he added almost $8 trillion to it. So, I mean, it's Donald Trump we're talking about. The fact that he said that he was going to do it does not in and of itself prove that he's going to do it. But it's the fact that he continued saying he was going to do it even after the thing he was hoping to get on a silver platter didn't happen. And that, if nothing else, saying, I'm going to free Ross, I'm going to end the Department of Education, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then getting elected, at the very least, even if he doesn't do any of those things, it at least mainstreams those ideas. They're now not just the thing that this kooky third party and maybe a few people in the Republican Party and one or two people in the Democrat Party are saying. The guy who won the election campaigned on these things. And I do think some of them will happen. I think Ross will be free, if for no other reason than there's really no political downside. Like, he doesn't have to try to get Congress involved. He doesn't even have to change any regulations. It's not like there's a significant political opposition to Ross being freed. It's kind of it's kind of an easy goal and something you can do right off the bat that'll make a lot of people happy. And obviously, change Ross and his family's life, most importantly. So I do think that'll happen. And I will say this, if that doesn't happen, then good luck on the other things happening. But if that does happen, then we'll see on the other things. But he's also promised to do a lot of things that we don't agree with. But the stuff he has said, if he does a significant number of those things, or even a decent number of those things that he has said he'd do, things that we agree with, it'll be better than if he hadn't gotten elected, put it that way.
Right. First of all, it's difficult for me because my anti-COVID mania stance, and the fact that even today he doubled down on Operation Warp Speed. So it's very difficult for me as an anti-COVID vaccine, anti-mandate physician who spoke out from the beginning. But with that said, well, a couple of things. I'd like the audience to understand that when Trump spoke at our convention, it was libertarians in the front, and then a whole bunch of listen, it's so funny, and a whole bunch of MAGA people in the back, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's really wild because there was these moments before he came on to speak where there was some tension between libertarians and MAGA people, actually. But then as soon as someone, like, then we'd shout "Free Ross" with our signs, and then they shout "Free Ross" back at so we were literally shouting "Free Ross" at each other. And there's some videos of it, and it was profound. But it was really, interesting to be us libertarians in the front with the MAGA people in the back, and they really were very respectful, but they sure didn't like us booing. And it was just a very wild experience. I actually wasn't there for the whole time because I stayed with Mike. Yeah, because he was, of course, at the time, vice presidential candidate. But, Trump said, and I believe him, that he said that he had trouble filling his cabinet and his appointed positions, wasn't really a politician. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. Originally he was supposed to have Kennedy have a vaccine safety and efficacy committee, and then he reneged on that deal. This is 4 years ago, and took a lot of money from Big Pharma. The fact that he named, Kennedy as his nominee for Health and Human Services, and Kennedy, is not a libertarian, but he definitely is anti-regulatory capture to many extent, and he's right about a lot of the stuff related to COVID mania tyranny. But he also has Elon and Vivek with Doge. So talk to me about how you feel about that. So I want to give Trump the grace to be better than what he once was, but I'm, just, concerned. But so what do you think about Doge and some other stuff?
Yeah, so I want to address the COVID thing first. Let's be very clear. Donald Trump let Anthony Fauci run the government for a number of months. And then even after he publicly complained about it going into like May and June or whatever, he was still pretty much letting Anthony Fauci call the shots in a really oddly weird, what you would expect of Donald Trump, where he's complaining about something someone's doing and letting them continue doing it while he has the power to at least curtail what they're doing, but he doesn't. And to this day, I mean, like, you want to talk about capture, like he felt captured at times. And to this day, not only does he defend Operation Warp Speed, he defends at least the first couple months of lockdowns. And he will keep pointing to, well, Sweden had it much worse. Actually, Sweden didn't. When all things were said and done, Sweden did better than most countries, similar countries with similar demographics and similar population density and everything else. They actually did better than that. They did have some restrictions, but they did not have lockdowns, and they largely relied on informing people with the information they had at the time of best practices, and then trusting them to do it or not. And if they didn't do it, then they didn't do it, but they'd say, this is what we were pretty sure. So he did that. He then took that opportunity to spend stimulus spending that would have made George Bush blush at the worst times of TARP. Literally take TARP spending numbers and add a zero at the end. Instead of hundreds of billions, we're spending trillions just on that. And that immediate, like that insane amount of debt spending in such a short period of time caused the money printer to go on a completely different level, because they literally didn't have the funds to do it. And so they added so much to the ledger, and that directly contributed to the really high inflation numbers we saw those first couple of years of the Biden administration. Not that Biden made it any better. He continued spending, and actually was able to beat Trump's debt record by the end of it. But the point is, yeah, this is not Liberty Hero that just got elected, right? Like, this is not the libertarian hero.
Correct.
We hope
no, absolutely.
We hope that he has learned his lesson on some of these things. And I guess more to the point, because Donald Trump doesn't strike me as much of an ideologue. He doesn't seem to have much of like his own ideology. He has some kind of like some concepts that seem to be pretty set in stone about, the concept of America, and his thoughts on trade and migration seem to be somewhat malleable, but fairly well set. the rest of it seems to be it's who's around him giving him advice that he thinks he can trust. He goes with it. And honestly, you're running as something as big as the government. That probably is how you should do it. But he doesn't really have a foundational ideology guiding a lot of that. And I think the problem is it comes down to who is he surrounded with. And last time he surrounded himself with swamp creatures. This time, like, you got Rubio, you got a few swamp creatures in there, but then you got some people that aren't. And you got some people that are kind of wild cards. I consider Kennedy a wild card because with RFK, he has, at least in the past, supported ideas like Medicare for all and socialization of healthcare. He's being put in charge of healthcare. Now, he's not a legislator, but he could use that bully pulpit and push for those types of things. He is absolutely against regulatory capture and is a very strong proponent against ending regulatory capture. Unfortunately, in the past, the way he's proposed ending regulatory capture is with more regulation of the private sector instead of understanding that the problem is the regulation. But I know he has moderated his tune on that in recent months, and so I really want. I'm willing. I know, if, for example, he did just about a 180 when it came to lockdowns. So who knows? Maybe he's turned over a new leaf on that. The bottom line is we shall see on that. I do think, if nothing else, RFK is a giant FU to the organization of people who arbitrarily on a day-to-day basis decided whether or not we were allowed to, go to a sporting event or go see our loved ones or go eat if we weren't vaccinated. There's a video of Mandy Cohen, no relation, who now heads the CDC, where back when she was the head of the equivalent of the CDC in North Carolina, and she was talking about how she was on the phone with her friend saying, are we going to let them go to football games? No, let's not do that. And she's joking about it, but the fact was, it was that arbitrary. They weren't doing it based on science. It was based on what they thought they could get away with telling us what to do. And
no science, non-science.
And it's like when you're a hammer, every problem's a nail. When you're an epidemiologist, every problem means you should just stay in your house forever. Like, it's, what are they? They're not looking at the overall implications of what they're proposing. They're looking very narrowly. RFK is a giant FU to that. They're like, oh, okay, you're going to arbitrarily tell us what to do. Okay, your boss is going to be a guy who's like skeptical of everything you say, and has been like he's the boogeyman. It would be like having a department of protecting kids from nightmares, and you put Freddy Krueger in as the chief of it or something. Like they're literally putting in like the personification of everything these people despise. Yeah, he's your boss. So I like that. I like that part of it, but we'll see how it plays out. Now, to answer your question about Doge, my understanding is Doge is actually almost more of a blue ribbon panel. Like, they're not an actual. They're calling themselves the Department of Government Affairs, but they're not an actual government department. The benefit of that is they can operate outside of government. They can appoint people that don't have to go through the government government worker process or any of that stuff. They don't have to get any kind of appointments. They don't have to wait for the Senate to approve any appointments. They're basically like an advisory board. And the positive of that is they have way more agility to do stuff. And if the president authorizes it, then they can still get all the access they need to stuff to be able to really dive down into the numbers and say what needs to be done and what needs to be ended and what needs to be changed. The flip side of that is there's not really much teeth behind it unless they can get significant enough public support behind it and significant enough congressional support behind it and support from the president behind it to get those regulations changed by the president or repealed by the president, or to get those legislative changes made at the congressional level. And if nothing else, to get it out to the public that these things need to happen. And if Congress doesn't act, then it becomes something that the people put pressure on them to act. So I'm fairly bullish about it. We'll see how it ends up turning out. If it flops, it flops. The benefit is the worst case scenario, because it's not an actual government organization. The worst case scenario is they don't accomplish anything. It's not like there's not really any risk of them making anything worse because they're not an actual government agency. So that's good. So I will say I think it's. I am somewhere between cautiously and hopefully optimistic that we'll see at least some positive things. I will say there are some things that are set in stone. Our national debt is going to increase by several $trillion. I think that's very likely. And if it does, and by the way, if that doesn't happen, I will be happy to publicly eat my words and praise Donald Trump for not doing that as many times as anyone wants me to. I would be more than happy to be wrong about that. History tells us that's what's going to happen. I think there's probably going to be a net increase in regulations. That just seems to happen because these agencies tend to have just this constant creep of increasing their own regulations. It's like AI creating its own programs. Like it seems to be baked into the cake. But we'll see. Hopefully I'm wrong. But I think even if those things happen, I think a lot of what we're seeing is good, or can be good. And if he does even a significant number of the things that he's promising to do for us, I think it will have been a net positive. Whether or not you voted for him, whether or not you supported him, I long ago gave up on trying to tell people who to support, who to vote for. It brings out both for example, with Trump, you've got Trump derangement syndrome type 1. It's the people that are, the suburban white women getting out of their $100,000 cars to buy a handmaiden's outfit to pretend they're being a pro, whatever. So that's TDS type 1. TDS type 2 are the people that, like, you can straight up say, like, government debt is bad, and they will go through mental and physical gymnastics to explain how Donald Trump did it to own the libs, and when Trump does it, it's good, and if anyone else does it, it's bad. So supporting, getting involved in, like, you should support this politician, you should vote for this candidate, you should vote against this person, you should support this political party or be against this party. I gave all that up because A, it's not useful, and B, there are things that are actually more useful for me to talk about. With all of that said, I think if Trump does a significant number of the things he's promised to libertarians, then I think it will be a net positive that he got elected.
Yeah, I agree with all of those points. And one of the points that you made earlier is that people are talking about Doge and eliminating bureaucratic waste because of this entity that is not actually a real.
It's mainstreaming it. Yeah.
Mainstreaming it. But, it's very interesting what Vivek, who is a small L libertarian, that's my understanding, said, is that a lot of the things that they're getting rid of were things that were created by executive action, which is a whole thing about how our Constitution really doesn't have any openings for all of this. Not openings, what's the word? Our Constitution doesn't really allow for the federal government to have such power that it pretends to use, that it pretends to have, right? So I think that that's a good concept, even if they don't actually do some of it, for people to understand the concept that a lot of the federal government's actions are not constitutionally based. But also people are talking about all these things. So I think that that's pretty good. And we have to remember that, Kennedy is a Kennedy Democrat, right? And so I think that there's a component of that, and he isn't a libertarian, but, removing regulatory capture is significantly helpful. And again, like you said, at least we're talking about these things now. On foreign policy, though, the picks are pretty painful to watch. But one of the interesting picks is that they put Tulsi Gabbard on the terror watch list, and then he made her director of special intelligence.
The Tulsi Gabbard pick, the Matt Gaetz pick, the Tulsi Gabbard pick, and the RFK pick, to me, maybe I'm wrong, but to me, those seem to be Trump's FU to those departments. And maybe the Pete Hegseth pick as well. Those seem to be the ones that are like, oh yeah, everything you hate. Who do you hate more than it? Like he did he did a survey of the people that work in that agency and said, who's the person you hate the most? And then they and if it was an American, who's the American citizen that you hate the most? and then he pointed that person to that agency. So we'll see. Yeah, I was not one of the people. Well, put it this way: when Donald Trump was in office the last time, he made some positive. He did some positive stuff. He got into an unconditional series of negotiations with North Korea, which had some good results from that. He had some reproaches with Iran that people weren't expecting because of his rhetoric against the Iran deal and stuff like that. And he, got some openings with things like the Abraham Accords and whatever. Israel and the United Arab Emirates are now have regular relations, and other countries, that were at war or in open conflict with each other were at least talking with each other. So there was some good stuff there. Unfortunately, what happened was, and this started with John Bolton, but it was the entire apparatus. They figured out when he watched Fox News, and if they could get slots on that time on Fox and say things like, Putin thinks that President Trump is weak, but he's not weak. He's strong. And that's why he should do blah, blah, blah. They realized they could kind of play to his ego. And that's when you ended up with a lot of stuff that the first couple of years of Trump wouldn't have done, like the assassination of the defense minister of Iran at an Iraqi civilian airport, and like stuff that was not initially going to happen. I'm concerned about these picks, but I also I honestly, I expect that Donald Trump is going to be a lot closer to the status quo of neoconservatism than a lot of his supporters would like. It remains to be seen if the status quo of neoconservatism under Trump isn't a slight reduction in neoconservatism from the last 4 years. We'll see. But yeah, I was not one of the people that thought that Trump was going to, end the wars and bring all the troops home. I did not. He wasn't even really saying he was going to do that. So I'm not surprised by his national security picks, put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Although I am glad at least it's not Pompeo.
Not being Pompeo is a good thing, but if you look at his foreign policy picks, state, I guess director of national intelligence falls in intelligence and foreign policy pick, the ambassador to the UN, some of the other ambassador picks he's made. It looks overall like it's going to be, for the most part, business as usual, but maybe pre-Biden business as usual, because there's definitely been an escalation. We've had neoconservative foreign policy on steroids for the past 4 years. So we'll see what happens. I will say this, and I always want people to remember this. We got out of Afghanistan. It's the first time we've gotten out of a war in quite some time. Actually, like fully withdrew from a country we were actively bombing in quite some time. Biden pulled the trigger on actually doing it. The groundwork was laid by Trump, and all sorts of mistakes were made. I'm not saying it was done well, but it did happen. And I guess the reason I want to bring that up is if we see some additional pullback from other countries, don't be surprised if there is similar blowback that happens along the way like there was in Afghanistan. And it didn't happen because Trump is weak or stupid or whatever. It happened because that's what happens when you've been inflaming a region for years or decades and then you leave. That inflammation doesn't go away, right? So, but it's not a reason to stay forever. So we'll see. We'll see. But I know you wanted to close out with one other thing, but yeah, I'm going into this with some cautious optimism, but I also didn't have the highest hopes to begin with. When it comes, I don't. Donald Trump's not going to be our libertarian superhero. Might he do some good? It looks like he might.
Yeah, I think I can agree with you on that and sit there. There was a recent endorsement that we want to share. I just
So is this of so just so I understand, because you told me about this literally before we started this, I hadn't even heard of it. Is this of the national housing or of like the Bucks County or like the state? Like what department am I being endorsed? Like at what level of government am I being endorsed? Or
In Trump's administration. So the
Trump's administration, okay.
So the Bucks County Libertarian Party has done a series of endorsements. For example, they put out a thing about endorsing Thomas Massie for the Department of Agriculture. They put one out for me because actually I have been nominated and recommended for a position in the health sector. So they did for a health policy position. So they did one for me, and New Jersey just did one tonight for me too, the state. So, but this one, so the Libertarian Party of Bucks County probably endorses Spike Cohen for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So my question, so this is for the Trump administration. So
it's just so random. Like I don't.
I'm sorry, I can't stop laughing. It's just so adorable, and I'm having the grandest time being the first one to show this to you. So it's just like the best memory.
I love the photo they've chosen of me because it looks like I'm going, Secretary of what? Of that's my reaction to being told what's on this thing.
I know, it's like predictive programming. That's the face you gave me when I know
when you said it, I'm like, why? So
yeah. What would you do what would a libertarian do as Secretary for Housing and Urban Development in the federal government?
Weld the door shut and tell everyone to go home and get another job. I would the federal government has no business getting involved in housing or development of neighborhoods or any of that. And in fact, the federal government's involvement of that is directly correlated with the ridiculous overregulation of land use, especially in suburban and urban areas, which directly relates to massive increases in the cost of living, and on every front because of a forced scarcity and availability of housing, all the way to the amount of regulations involved in the building of housing, which means if any property costs a minimum flat amount to build, you have to charge that much more, which means you're going to build a bigger house. You're not going to build a smaller house because you're not going to make nearly as much money. Your percentage return is going to be much lower than if you build a bigger house. That's why everyone's building McMansions. And if you don't have McMansion money, oh well. And all of that is, goes back to, federal government involvement in that. And frankly, state government involvement in it as well. They really shouldn't be involved either. So yeah, if I got appointed to that, it would hopefully be a very short reign, where I would spend every day telling President Trump, this should not exist. Can we just use the what is it he's trying to bring back, title or schedule something which streamlines his ability to fire government workers. I forget what it's called. He started it when in his last presidency, and it was ended under Biden. But if he brings that back, I would say use that to fire me and everyone else in this department. So that would be, I would advocate for my firing and everyone. I'd say fire everyone under me, and then me, I'll be the one to turn the lights off when we leave.
Right. So, just at the last episode of Cheers, right?
Yes. Yeah. I'll hang up the Spirit I'll help them put up the Spirit Halloween banner and whatever. Yeah. No, I'm honored. I find it funny that that's what they picked me for, but I guess any of them would have been random. Yeah, sure. I gladly accept, and will do my due diligence to try to have it shut down permanently.
That's great. I think that's how all of us libertarians feel about most positions, right? Appoint a libertarian in the Treasury Department and make someone a libertarian the head of the Federal Reserve. And
I'm a big, it's been said many times, I think the last governor of the Federal Reserve should be, the last chief of the Federal Reserve should be Ron Paul. And his final act will be in that position will be to abolish it, to shut it down permanently. Yeah, no, I'm a fan of that. So I can be the Ron Paul of HUD, I guess.
No, exactly. And I think I encourage Bucks County to nominate Ron Paul for head of the Federal Reserve, so that we could do that. So Spike, let's plug your stuff. It was super fun to have you on. I'm so incredibly grateful, and your work is just wonderful. And it was so good to see you. And say hi to Tasha, because she's just such a wonderful human, and I miss her dearly. And then just before you do your plugs, we do the Jordan Page Free Ross song at the end of Liberty Speaks. That's our outro until he's free. So, and for people who don't know, it literally will tell the story. So you will know what about Free and Ross is. So let's plug you, Spike, and then we'll just give a little bit of information about Liberty Speaks. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go to youarethepower.net. We'd love to have you be a part of what we're doing. We are finding people who are being abused by local and state out of control government officials at the local and state level. We fight for them to get the justice and respect they deserve. We don't stop fighting until we win, and we win all the time. We keep winning. We'd love to have you win with us. So youarethepower.net. If you want to follow what I'm doing outside of You Are the Power, which isn't that much, you can go to my social. I'm easily found on the internet, whatever your social media platform of choice is. If you look for Spike Cohen, you'll find me, and you can get my hot takes about squirrels and raccoons and lasers and all sorts of fun stuff. Yeah, so follow me on social media, but more importantly, join us at youarethepower.net. And you can follow all of our socials at YATP official is the You Are the Power. But if you look for You Are the Power, you'll find that as well. Thank you for having me, and join Liberty Speaks.
Thank you so much, Spike. Yeah, so Liberty Speaks can be found on Twitter at National Speaks. We go live to Rumble and X. We do not go live to Facebook and YouTube because we don't participate in our censorship enslavement. We are on Apple and Spotify. So check us out there, and we would love to have everybody like and share and promote our videos. We're working towards just spreading the concepts of liberty to people outside of the libertarian space. Check out Spike at You Are the Power and send some donations because he's doing great work. We're going to outro with Free Ross because we really need Ross free. Thanks again, Spike.
Thank you. And thank you guys for tuning.
On day one, I will commute the sentence of Ross Ulbricht to a sentence of time served.
Is there anywhere on earth where a man can still be free? Will he bear the weight alone, or will he have to bend the knee? Is there no one in this land who grows tired of the game, where the wicked gather stones and build up prisons in our name? There's a story that you've heard before. It's been told in every age of a gentle soul misplaced inside so